Welcome back to another Serial Killer Saturday. Today we focus on AILEEN WOURNOS. Born Eileen Carol Pittman in Rochester, Michigan in February of 1956. Her mother Diane was just 15 years old when she married Eileen's father, Leo, in June of 1954. Less than 2 years later, 2 months before Eileen was born, Diane filed for divorce. Eileen also had an older brother named Keith, who was born in February of 1955. WOURNOS never met her father because he was in prison for the rape and attempted murder of a 7-year-old girl when she was born. Leo Pittman was considered to be a schizophrenic and was convicted of sex crimes against children, was in and out of prison, and hanged himself in prison in 1969. However, in January of 1960, when Eileen was almost 4, Diane abandoned her children, leaving them with their maternal grandparents, Lori and Brenda WOURNOS, who legally adopted Keith and Eileen in March of 1960. At age 11, WOURNOS engaged in sexual activities in school in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, and food. She had also engaged in sexual activities with her own brother. WOURNOS claimed that she was sexually assaulted and beaten as a child by her grandfather, an alcoholic. According to her accusations, before beating her, he would force her to strip out of her clothes. In 1970, at age 14, she became pregnant, having been raped by a friend of her grandfather. WOURNOS gave birth at a home for unwed mothers, and the child was placed for adoption. A few months after her baby was born, WOURNOS dropped out of school at about the time that her grandmother died of liver failure. Eileen and her brother subsequently became wards of the court. When she was 15, her grandfather threw her out of the house, and she began supporting herself as a prostitute and living in the woods near her old home. On the 27th of May of 1974, Eileen was arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado, for driving under the influence, disorderly conduct, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. She was later charged with failure to appear. In 1976, Eileen hitchhiked to Florida, where she met 69-year-old yacht club president Louis Gratz Fell. They married that same year, and the announcement of their nuptials was printed in the society pages of the local newspaper. However, Eileen continually involved herself in confrontations at their local bar, and eventually went to jail for assault. She also hit Fell with his own cane, leading him to get a restraining order against her. She then returned to Michigan where, on July 14th of 1976, she was arrested in Antrim County, Michigan, and charged with assault and disturbing the peace for throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head. In July, her brother Keith died of esophageal cancer, and Eileen received $10,000 from his life insurance. Eileen and Fell annulled their marriage on July 21st after only 9 weeks of marriage. On May 20th, 1981, Eileen was arrested in Edgewater, Florida for the armed robbery of a convenience store, where she stole $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. She was sentenced to prison on May 4th of 1982 and released on June 30th of 1983. On May 1st of 1984, she was arrested for attempting to pass forged checks at a bank in Key West. On November 30th of 1985, she was named as a suspect in the theft of a revolver and ammunition in Pasco County. On January 4th of 1986, Eileen was arrested in Miami and charged with grand theft auto, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice for providing identification with her aunt's name. Miami police officers found a .38 caliber revolver and a box of ammunition in the stolen car. On June 2nd of 1986, sheriffs detained WOURNOS for questioning after a male companion accused her of pulling a gun in his car and demanding $200. AILEEN was found to be carrying spare ammunition, and a .22 pistol was discovered under the passenger seat she had occupied. Around this time, AILEEN met Tyria Moore, a hotel maid, at a Daytona gay bar. They moved in together, and AILEEN supported them with her prostitution earnings. On July 4th of 1987, Daytona Beach police detained AILEEN and Moore at a bar for questioning regarding an incident in which they were accused of assault and battery with a beer bottle. On March 12th of 1988, AILEEN accused a Daytona Beach bus driver of assault. She claimed that he pushed her off the bus following a confrontation. Moore was listed as a witness to the incident. Richard Mallory, age 51. In November of 1989, electronics store owner in Clearwater, Florida, was AILEEN's first victim. He was a convicted rapist whom she claimed to have killed in self-defense. 2 days later, a sheriff found Mallory's abandoned vehicle. In December, Mallory's body was found several miles away in a wooded area. He had been shot several times, but 2 bullets to the left lung were found to have been the cause of death. It was on this murder that AILEEN would eventually be condemned. David Spears, age 43, construction worker in Winter Garden, Florida. In June of 1990, his nude body was found along Highway 19 in Citrus County, Florida. He had been shot 6 times. Charles Karskinen, age 40, was a part-time rodeo worker. In June of 1990, his body was found in Pasco County, Florida. He had been shot 9 times with a small caliber weapon. Peter Seams, age 65. In July of 1990, his car was found in Orange Springs, Florida. WOURNOS and Moore were seen abandoning the car, and WOURNOS' palm print was found on the interior door handle. His body was never found. Troy Burris, age 50. He was a sausage salesman from Ocala, Florida. In July of 1990, he was reported missing. In August of 1990, his body was found in a wooded area along State Road 19 in Marion County, Florida. He had been shot twice. Charles Dick Humphreys, age 56. A retired U.S. Air Force major, former state child abuse investigator, and former chief of police. In September of 1990, his body was found in Marion County, Florida. He was fully clothed and had been shot 6 times in the head and torso. His car was found in Suwannee County, Florida. Walter Gino Antonio, age 62, Police Reserve. In November of 1990, Antonio's nearly nude body was found near a remote logging road in Dixie County, Florida. He had been shot 4 times. 5 days later, his car was found in Brevard County, Florida. In July of 1990, WOURNOS and Moore abandoned Peter Seams' car after they were involved in an accident. Witnesses who had seen the women driving the victims' cars provided police with their names and descriptions, resulting in a media campaign to locate them. Police also found some of the victims' belongings in pawn shops and retrieved fingerprints matching those found in the victims' cars. WOURNOS had a criminal justice record in Florida, and her fingerprints were already on file. On January 9th of 1991, AILEEN was arrested on an outstanding warrant at the Last Resort, a biker bar in Volusia County. police located Moore the next day in Scranton, Pennsylvania. She agreed to elicit a confession from AILEEN in exchange for immunity. Moore returned with police to Florida, where she was put up in a motel. Under police guidance, Moore made numerous telephone calls to WOURNOS, pleading for help in clearing her name. 3 days later, on January 16th of 1991, WOURNOS confessed to the murders. She claimed the men had tried to rape her, and she killed them in self-defense. On January 14th of 1992, AILEEN went to trial for the murder of Richard Mallory. Prior bad acts are normally inadmissible in criminal trials. However, under Florida's Williams Rule, the prosecution was allowed to introduce evidence related to other crimes to show a pattern of illegal activity. On January 27th of 1992, WOURNOS was convicted of Richard Mallory's murder with help from Moore's testimony. At her sentencing, psychiatrists for the defense testified that AILEEN was mentally unstable and had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. 4 days later, she was sentenced to death. On March 31st of 1992, AILEEN pled no contest to the murders of Dick Humphreys, Troy Burris, and David Spears, saying she wanted to get right with God. In her statement to the court, she stated, "I wanted to confess to you that Richard Mallory did violently rape me, as I've told you, but these others did not. They only began to start to." On May 15th of 1992, WOURNOS was given 3 more death sentences. In June of 1992, WOURNOS pled guilty to the murder of Charles Karskeden. In November of 1992, she received her 5th death sentence. The defense made efforts during the trial to introduce evidence that Mallory had been tried for intent to commit rape in Maryland, and that he had been committed to a maximum security correctional facility in Maryland that provided remediation to sexual offenders. Records obtained from that institution reflected that from 1958 to 1962, Mallory was committed for treatment and observation resulting from a criminal charge of assault with intent to rape, and received an overall 8 years of treatment from the facility. In 1961, it was observed of Mr. Mallory that he possessed strong sociopathic trends. The judge refused to allow this to be admitted in the court as evidence and denied WOURNOS' request for a retrial. In February of 1993, WOURNOS pled guilty to the murder of Walter Gino Antonio and was sentenced to death again. No charges were brought against her for the murder of Peter Symes, as his body was never found. In all, she received 6 death sentences. AILEEN told several inconsistent stories about the killings and claimed initially that all 7 men had raped her while she was working as a prostitute, but later recanted the claim of self-defense. During an interview with filmmaker Nick Broomfield, when she thought the cameras were off, she told him that it was in fact self-defense, but she could not stand being on death row, where she had been for 12 years at that point, and wanted to die. AILEEN's appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court was denied in 1996. In 2001, she announced that she would not issue any further appeals against her death sentence. She petitioned the Florida Supreme Court for the right to fire her legal counsel and stop all appeals, saying, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'll do it again too. There's no chance of keeping me alive or anything because I'll kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I'm so sick of hearing she's crazy. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell you the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and will kill again." A defense attorney argued that she was in no state for them to honor such a request. However, Florida Governor Jeb Bush instructed 3 psychiatrists give her a 15-minute interview. The test for competency requires the psychiatrist to be convinced that the condemned person understands that she will die and for which crimes she is being executed. All 3 deemed her mentally fit to be executed. AILEEN later started accusing the prison matrons of abusing her. She accused them of tainting her food, spitting on it, serving her potatoes cooked in dirt, and her food arriving with urine. She also claimed overhearing conversations about trying to get me pushed over the brink, so I'd end up committing suicide before the execution, and wishing to rape me before execution. She also complained of strip searches, being handcuffed so tightly that her wrists bruised any time she left her cell, door kicking, frequent window checks by matrons, low water pressure, mildew on her mattress, and catcalling. The list goes on and on. During the final stages of the appeal process, she gave a series of interviews to Broomfield. In her final interview shortly before her execution, she claimed that her mind was being controlled by sonic pressure to make her appear crazy, and described her impending death as being taken away by angels on a spaceship. WOURNOS said to Broomfield, "You sabotaged my ass. Society, the cops, the system. A raped woman got executed and was used for books and movies and shit." Her final words in the on-camera interview were, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass." Broomfield later met Dawn Botkins, a childhood friend of WOURNOS, who told him, "She's sorry. She didn't give you the finger. She gave the media the finger, the attorneys the finger. And if she knew she said much more, it would make a difference on her execution tomorrow. So she just decided not to." AILEEN was brought into the death chamber on October 9th of 2002. She had KFC as her last meal and was given a $20 budget. Her last words before the execution? "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back, I'll be back." At 9:47 a.m., AILEEN WOURNOS died. She was the 10th woman in the United States to be executed since the Supreme Court lifted the ban on capital punishment in 1976, and the 2nd woman ever executed in Florida. After her execution, her body was cremated, and her ashes were taken by Dawn Botkins to her native Michigan and spread beneath a tree. She requested that Natalie Merchant's song Carnival be played at her funeral. Natalie Merchant commented on this when asked why her song was played during the credits of the documentary, titled AILEEN, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. When director Nick Broomfield sent a working edit of the film, I was so disturbed by the subject matter that I couldn't even watch it. AILEEN WOURNOS led a torturing life that is beyond my worst nightmares. It wasn't until I was told that AILEEN spent many hours listening to my album, Tiger Lily, while on death row and requested Carnival be played at her funeral, that I gave permission for the use of the song. It's very odd to think of the places my music can go once it leaves my hands. If it gave her some solace, I have to be grateful. I tried to stay away from too many photographs of AILEEN in the courtroom in handcuffs, as it seems to be predominantly the only photographs that people ever see of her. If you notice, that isn't the case when it comes to Ted Bundy or even Ed Gein. And this case, just like all the others, don't leave me feeling scared or even angry at the killer, although I think anger is a justifiable feeling. I'm left with the feeling of sadness, for this was yet another life that could have been so different. See you next time.